talking primarily about the clinical assessment of abuse potential during drug development. I'll probably touch on some other points, but it will be primarily focused on clinical assessment today. I've split the presentation into two parts. I'm aware that some people may be more interested in either new molecular entities or abuse deterrent or other reformulations. So that way you can kind of tune out during the parts you may be less interested in. I'm going to focus my talk today primarily on the U.S. situation. The U.S. regulatory framework and guidance documents are probably the most well-established and detailed, and they're also typically the most stringent. So anything that you do to satisfy the FDA is typically going to be more than enough for other jurisdictions. Many people are probably aware, but there are two draft guidances from the FDA available. The first one from 2010 is primarily around new molecular entities, and the second one is specifically on opioid abuse deterrent formulations from 2013. However, if we look into some of the details of this guidance document, there are some aspects of the design and analysis that may apply to new molecular entities as well. And we've heard rumblings that there will be final guidances issued in 2015. Whether or not that will be a single combined guidance or two separate final guidances, we don't yet know. And of course, we're also waiting for a guidance on generic ADFs in 2015. In terms of the U.S. regulatory framework for new molecular entities, most of the framework is really around comparisons to existing controlled substances. So really looking at chemical or pharmacological similarity to drugs that are already abused. Throughout these programs, we're looking for signals and determining subsequent courses of action. And generally, some kind of assessment is going to be a requirement for all CNS drugs. And of course, the primary implications for these kinds of assessments are around the scheduling of the drug and, by extension of that, the labeling. It's a little bit different with reformulations, and I'm talking here not only about those with less abuse potential, so the so-called ADFs, but also with those that may have greater abuse potential. For example, a reformulation from an oral to a nasal route. In both of these cases, however, the implications are primarily around labeling, although we know with the ADFs there's some possibility for removal of non-ADF generics. So as I said, I'm first going to discuss the new molecular entities and the 8-factor framework. This is simply wording from the Controlled Substances Act in the U.S. And I'm going to highlight the word stimulant, depressant, or hallucinogenic effect because that goes back to what I was talking about in terms of looking at signals. If you see such a signal in your program, you're meant to submit all data pertinent to the abuse potential of the drug. In addition to the ISS, a proposal by the sponsor for the schedule, and data on overdose. And the extent of the evaluation is going to depend on the drug and the available data, so what you see throughout the program. This is the 8-factor framework that the agency uses to determine the abuse potential of a drug and determine the schedule. And I'm not going to read it out. It basically comes down to chemistry, preclinical and clinical pharmacology, epidemiology, and safety. In terms of some of the more recent developments we've seen from the FDA in terms of new molecular entities, we haven't seen a lot of movement, frankly, since the 2010 guidance. That particular guidance has all of the basics there, although we know some of the detailed items aren't being enforced. And there's some potential for updated methodological issues. In 2011, the FDA issued a draft decision tree, which has never, to my knowledge, been finalized, but it does reflect what had become a fairly standard approach for new molecular entities in terms of the types of studies that are conducted. Most new molecular entities will require full evaluation. However, of course, each product is unique. And this is just a brief overview of the types of data that will be required during development. And I'm going to focus my talk today primarily on the two red ones here, the clinical data. So first I'm going to talk about the clinical trial data of interest. And this is data should be derived from all clinical studies. So not only in the primary indication, but also any studies that have been performed in other indications, whether or not they're being submitted, as well as healthy volunteers. It basically comprises an analysis of 8 adverse events showing mood elevation, stimulation, sedation, or hallucinogenic effects. And that goes back to the wording from the CSA that I showed you earlier. This is really the only opportunity that we have to look at abuse potential in the patient populations as well as healthy volunteers. And we heavily rely on these data to determine signals and the development plan of a drug. And the agency also uses this data in their assessment of overall abuse potential from the NDA submission.